The first thing you notice about Singapore is the quiet, not silence exactly. There are cars, there are people, there's activity. But underneath all of that, there's an order that you feel before you understand it. Nothing seems accidental here. The streets are clean in a way that feels intentional. The buildings are positioned like someone planned exactly where they should go. Even the trees look like they were placed deliberately. And after a while, you realize that's because they were. Almost everything in Singapore was planned, designed, controlled. That word gets used a lot when people talk about this place, control. And it usually comes with a judgment attached. Like control is automatically a bad thing. Like freedom is always better. But I've spent enough time here to know it's more complicated than that. Singapore chose control, and that choice built something remarkable. I want to understand why, not to defend it or attack it, just to understand how a city this small, with almost no natural resources, became one of the most important financial centers in the world. And the answer, as far as I can tell, comes down to one decision made a long time ago: the decision to eliminate chaos, to design a system where surprises don't happen, where risk is managed before it becomes danger. That's a different philosophy than what you see in New York or London. Those places run on energy and volatility. They accept crashes as the price of growth. Singapore looked at that model and said, no, we can't afford crashes. We're too small. We have no room for error. And so they built something else. Something that doesn't make headlines because headlines require drama. Singapore doesn't do drama. It just works. To understand why Singapore chose control, you have to understand the fear that came with independence. This is a country that didn't ask to exist. It was expelled from Malaysia in 1965. Suddenly independent, suddenly alone, a tiny island with no natural resources, surrounded by larger neighbors, with no obvious path to survival. That's a terrifying position to be in. And the people who built modern Singapore never forgot that fear. It shaped every decision they made, every institution they created, every rule they enforced. When you're that vulnerable, you can't afford to experiment. You can't afford to let things develop organically and hope they work out. You have to control the outcome. You have to plan everything. Because one major mistake, one serious crisis, and it's over. There's no backup, no second chance, no vast territory to absorb the shock. That's why Singapore became what it is. Not because the people here love rules, but because rules were the only thing standing between survival and collapse. I think about that when I see how the financial system operates here. It's strict, more regulated than almost anywhere else. The rules are clear and they're enforced consistently. There's very little ambiguity, very little room for creative interpretation. In some financial centers, regulation is reactive. Something goes wrong, and then they make a rule to prevent it from happening again. Singapore doesn't work that way. The rules come first. They try to prevent the problem before it exists. They imagine what could go wrong and they close that door before anyone walks through it. That's frustrating for some people, especially people who come from systems that reward cleverness, where finding loopholes is considered smart. Here, loopholes get closed fast. And if you're the one who found it, you might find yourself in trouble. But that strictness creates something valuable. It creates predictability. When you do business in Singapore, you know what the rules are. You know they won't change suddenly. You know that everyone else is following the same rules. And that predictability is worth a lot, especially when you're moving large amounts of money, especially when stability matters more than speed. There's a reason why so much wealth flows through Singapore. It's not because the returns are highest here. They're often not. It's because the risk is lowest. Because a system is designed to prevent the kind of chaos that destroys value overnight. For a certain kind of investor, that's exactly what they want. They're not looking to get rich quick. They're looking to stay rich. And Singapore is very good at helping people stay rich. I want to talk about the culture that makes this possible. Because the financial system didn't appear out of nowhere. It came from something deeper, a set of values that most people here seem to share. Control isn't just a government policy in Singapore, it's a social norm. People here value order, they value predictability, they value knowing what to expect, and they're willing to give up certain things to maintain that. In other cultures, freedom is the highest value, the right to do what you want, say what you want, live how you want. And any restriction on that freedom feels like an attack, like something important is being taken away. Singapore made a different calculation. They decided that some restrictions are worth accepting if they create stability, if they create safety, if they allow the whole system to function smoothly. That's not a popular idea in the West. It sounds authoritarian. And in some ways, it is. There are things you can't do here that you can do elsewhere, things you can't say, ways you can't behave. And if you break those rules, the consequences are real. But most people here don't experience that as oppression. They experience it as order, as a price of living in a place where things work, where the trains run on time, where the streets are safe, where you don't have to worry about the chaos that affects so many other places. That trade off isn't for everyone. Some people can't accept it. They need more freedom, more space, more room to challenge the system, and they leave. That's fine. Singapore doesn't try to be everything to everyone. It just tries to be itself, controlled, ordered, designed. Let me talk about how Singapore handles crises, because that's where you really see the difference between systems. When something goes wrong in a free market system, you often see panic, markets swinging wildly, people making emotional decisions, information spreading faster than anyone can process it. And sometimes that panic makes things worse. The fear becomes self-fulfilling. The crisis deepens because everyone is reacting to everyone else's fear. Singapore doesn't panic, not because the people here are emotionless, but because the systems are designed to absorb shock, to respond quickly and calmly, to prevent small problems from becoming big ones. When the Asian financial crisis hit in 1997, countries around Singapore were devastated. Currencies collapsed, banks failed, governments fell. But Singapore came through relatively intact. Not because they were lucky, because they had built buffers, reserves, systems that could handle pressure without breaking. The same thing happened in 2008. And again, during the pandemic. Each time, Singapore took the hit and kept functioning. Not perfectly, there was stress, there were losses, but the system held. And it held because it was designed to hold. Because someone, years earlier, had thought about what could go wrong and planned for it. That's what control gives you. Not immunity from problems, but the ability to handle problems without falling apart. The ability to respond instead of react. To think instead of panic. I find myself noticing small things when I'm in Singapore. The way people line up, the way public spaces stay clean, the way rules are followed without much visible enforcement. It's not that there are police everywhere. It's that the expectation of order is internalized. People behave because that's what you do here. That's the norm. Financial behavior follows the same pattern. Singaporeans save at high rates. They don't take on excessive debt. They plan for the future, not because someone forces them to, but because that's the culture. Prudence is respected. Recklessness is not. That creates a stable foundation for the financial system. When households are disciplined, banks are more stable. When banks are stable, the whole system is more resilient. It's all connected. The control at the top reflects the discipline at the bottom. I've talked to people who work in finance here, and what strikes me is how different the mentality is from New York or London. There's ambition, yes. People want to succeed. But there's less of the cowboy energy, less of the belief that you can bend the rules and get away with it. more of a sense that you're part of a system and your job is to make that system work. Some people find that limiting. They want more freedom to innovate, to take risks, to try things that might fail spectacularly. And Singapore isn't really the place for that. The system doesn't reward that kind of behavior. It rewards reliability, consistency, doing what you said you would do. That's a trade-off. Innovation might be slower here. The big breakthroughs might happen somewhere else, but the big collapses happen somewhere else too. The frauds, the bubbles, the spectacular failures. Singapore trades excitement for stability. And for a lot of people, that's a good deal. I keep coming back to this idea that Singapore is designed. It's not a city that grew organically over centuries. It's a city that was built according to a plan, and that plan is still being updated, still being refined, still being controlled. That's unusual. Most places are shaped by history and accident and the accumulated decisions of millions of people over generations. Singapore is shaped by intention, by people sitting in rooms deciding what the city should be and then making it happen. There's something impressive about that. The clarity of vision, the discipline to execute, the willingness to make hard decisions and stick with them. But there's also something unsettling, at least for someone who comes from a different tradition. The sense that everything is managed, that there's no space for the unexpected, that the city might be optimized for efficiency at the cost of something harder to define. I don't know what to call that something. Spontaneity, maybe, or chaos, or just the mess of human life when it's allowed to unfold without too much interference. Some people need that mess. They find meaning in it. They feel alive when things are unpredictable. Singapore would feel suffocating to them. Others find peace in order. They don't want surprises. They don't want to worry about things falling apart. They want to know that the system works and that it will keep working. Singapore is built for them. Neither response is wrong. They're just different. Different values, different needs, different ideas about what makes life worth living. It's evening now. The skyline is lit up. Perfect. Clean. Every light in its place. The water reflects the buildings like a mirror. It's beautiful in a way that feels almost engineered, because it probably was. Somewhere, someone is making decisions about what this city will look like in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, planning for problems that haven't happened yet, building systems to handle crises that are still hypothetical. That's how Singapore thinks. Long term, controlled, designed. Is it the right way? I don't know. I'm not sure there is a right way, just different ways with different costs. The cost of chaos is obvious. Things break, people suffer, wealth disappears, systems collapse. The cost of control is subtler, harder to see, maybe harder to feel if you're inside the system and it's working well. But it's there. The freedom given up, the spontaneity lost, the parts of human experience that can't be planned or managed. Singapore made its choice a long time ago, and it keeps making that choice every day. Control over chaos, order over freedom, stability over excitement. And the system works. You can't deny that. It works remarkably well. But as I watch the city from up here, perfect and quiet and designed, I find myself wondering about the things I can't see, the costs that don't show up in the numbers, the trade-offs that only become visible over generations. Every system has those costs, even the best designed ones, maybe especially the best designed ones. Singapore knows that, I think. They plan for everything else. They must have thought about this too. Or maybe some things can't be planned for. Maybe some costs only reveal themselves in time, when it's too late to change course, when the design is already built into everything. I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows for certain. But the city keeps running, controlled, designed, still here, still working, and tomorrow it will run again, exactly as planned.